All right. Good morning, or good afternoon, whenever you're watching this. This should hopefully be quite a brief loom. I gave you quite a lot over the last couple of weeks. I've given you quite a lot of homework as well, so I'm wanting to wind it down as we get a bit closer to summer. So what I'm doing just now is I'm giving you the mandatory episodes of Buffy that I need you to have watched by the time you come back to the school, so that we can talk about them in class. And I'm going to give you some other episodes that I strongly recommend you watch. It's not mandatory, but there's a lot to them that you can learn from, and I will be referencing them in our learning. If you've chosen just to watch Buffy, fantastic. You've given yourself a mission. It is 7 seasons. The first season, as I said, isn't great. I mean, I love it, but I understand it's probably not great television. But there on in, it is very good. It is very interesting, and as I've said before, it is a piece of media that redefined feminism on TV and possibly even in film. So I do strongly recommend that you watch it. But if not, I'm going to give you the mandatory episodes. A wee explanation about why those episodes, the optional episodes, which I'll talk about in some depth, and then I'll go through each mandatory episode and I'll tell you what to look out for in each episode. I'm going to make this PowerPoint available on Teams so that you can download it and you can just have it nice and easy, nice and available. And that way, before you watch each episode, you can have a quick read about the episode and you can make sure that you know what you're looking for. I would recommend that when you watch the episodes, you take a few brief notes. I am also going to give you a wee plan of what episodes we'll be studying when we get back, or that's my plan, which means that I will also be recommending you watch them again when we go back, and that way you can refresh your understanding and what I'm talking about won't seem so distant or vague. Okay, but I do still want you to, I want you to have a couple of viewings of these episodes before you start writing anything on them, before we start really analysing them, so that they can kind of stick in your mind a bit. So that's what we're going to be doing today. I'm hoping to get this done in 30 minutes or less, but that'll very much remain to be seen. So I'm going to get rid of my face. There it goes. And I will... Boom. Go. Do the thing. Oh, well, there we go. So these are your mandatory episodes. That one is in red because that one's not mandatory, but it's a good idea to watch it because it informs episode 14. So quite a few from season 2. In season 2, Buffy was dealing with a lot of issues that might be faced by kind of teenage women. Kind of maybe it could be any age, but realistically, it was looking at very much this specific demographic. It was looking at your kind of 15, 16-year-old, maybe as high as kind of 17-year-old girls and the issues that they may face in their day-to-day life. It looks at some issues that hopefully they won't face in their day-to-day life, but issues that they certainly could. We then jump to season 4 and 5. We're looking very specifically at LGBT kind of representation in Buffy and how it's represented, the fact that it's represented, and so on and so forth. Episode 16, I'll talk about. Season 5, episode 16 is a one-off kind of episode. It has got our LGBT representation, which is one of the reasons it's there, but it's also one of the best pieces of media language that I've seen in a TV show. We'll talk about that one in quite a bit of depth. Season 6 carries on our LGBT representation, but there we're starting to look at things change a little bit, and we'll look at what changed in terms of the institutional impacts on it and how that impacted what was delivered on the show. Episode 13, 18, 19, and 20 deals with a mixture of kind of feminism in its more traditional kind of wave 2 feminism sense. It deals with toxic masculinity and white male rage, which is something we will talk about. And if we do wind up studying Joker, if I can work out a way to do that, white male rage is quite an interesting societal issue to look at when we're studying Joker. And it will look at treatment of LGBTQ plus people in the media, and we'll look at how potentially Joss Whedon undermined all the good work he did in previous episodes in this section, and why that may be, and what we can kind of take from it. So In each of these episodes, an element of feminism, whether intersectional or not, is dealt with. It might be elements of abuse, obvious patriarchy, undermining female voice, LGBTQ plus rights, or some other element entirely. These are not the only episodes in Buffy that are obviously feminist. Pretty much every episode of Buffy is obviously feminist. In pretty much every episode of Buffy, either you have a strong female hero or a strong female villain. There's very rare episodes where you couldn't easily point to elements of feminism within the show. These are just the ones that I think have the most applicability to further analysis. Okay, these push the boundaries perhaps the most. Now, these are the episodes I need you to watch. Okay, you can take a picture, you can screenshot it, or you can just wait for me to post this on Teams. But these are the ones that I need you to watch. We don't go into season 7 here. Season 7 has a lot of really good tackling of the patriarchy, but in my eyes, it doesn't do enough new, and in fact, goes on to undermine certain elements, which again, we'll talk about. These are the ones that I do strongly recommend. Season 1, episode 1, because we are going to analyse the opening and how it subverts our expectations, I would hope that you would watch that. Season 2, episode 9 and 10. What's my line? These are good representations of, well, not good representations. These are where Buffy starts to try and maybe represent other races within the show. That is something that Buffy, on the whole, can be criticised for. It is, why have I put episode? It is not necessarily it's definitely not the most inclusive show when it comes to race or minority groups. Now, it's aware of this. It even identifies why it does it in an episode, and we'll talk about that. But it's interesting to see what happens to characters in these episodes. So basically, we have the introduction of a black Slayer, as it were, and in these, it's 3 episodes. The Becoming Part 2 is the season 2 finale, I believe. So if you're watching 9 and 10 and 21, probably watch 22 too, because it kind of rounds off the story. But you've got an interesting introduction of a black character into Buffy, previously not really done in any major sense, and you have the rounding off of that story as well, so that's well worth watching. Season 4, episode 10, Hush, doesn't necessarily have well, I say it doesn't necessarily. It doesn't have the most obvious feminist overtones, but it is a fantastic episode. What it does with language is completely different from previous episodes. It's creepy, it's well put together, and it's well worth a watch just in terms of media language rather than feminism. And then season 7, episodes 18 to 22 is the finale of the show. It is the show finale, rounding off everything. It has brilliant examples of it. It's got an incredibly sexist character called Caleb. It tackles for the first time, really, religion, which is a very controversial thing for a show at this time in America to do, and it does it. It goes for it. It tackles what it sees as the problems with organized religion in America at that point, the obvious patriarchy, as well as a number of other elements. It is very much applicable to America at that time, even if we look more specifically, even specific states in America at that time, as opposed to being a blanket criticism. But it's a very interesting one. The character Caleb is very interesting, and ultimately what happens within this storyline is very interesting. It kind of pushes the Buffy metaphor as an empowerment for women to a point where it's no longer just encapsulating Buffy herself. I strongly recommend you watch these episodes. They are very good. As I've said, the whole show is good. Season 4 is a bit iffy. Season 1's a bit iffy. But apart from that, the whole show is very good. It's got some very good, very interesting characters. It's also worth bearing in mind there's a spin-off show that, though we will reference, you do not need to watch in any capacity, which is Angel. We will talk about Angel because he is a character who starts off in Buffy, and then his spin-off is kind of kicked off during Buffy season 3. Due to institutional factors, Angel sometimes appears in Buffy and sometimes doesn't. That's interesting. That's worth looking at, and how that impacts the story is also interesting. And we will also talk about the fact that there's a Buffy reboot reportedly in the works. There's nothing concrete yet. But again, you don't need to know anything about that. We'll just talk about why it's in the works, what is it about today's society, and that makes it interesting, and why is it relevant that they are planning on casting a black character as Buffy, and how would they have to deal with that to make it more than just tokenistic. There's also comics that, again, you don't need to read about, but we'll reference. So after Buffy finished in season 7, comics came out as well, and we'll talk about those comics and the impact that they have. So very quickly, I'm going to talk you through the episodes that you have to look at over your summer. So season 2, episode 5, Reptile Boy. In this episode, you're looking at a depiction of privileged groups, specifically white male college students. We are looking at them. Ooh, that's the sound of the ice cream van. It's a lovely day, but I'm in the middle of a loom. See what I give up for you guys? You're very lucky. Sorry. In this episode, you're looking at a depiction of a very privileged group of white male college students. Specifically, it's an episode that comes up as poignant again and again and again. If you look at it closely, it depicts how power in America kind of spreads through families rather than through being earned. It talks about hereditary kind of grounding in colleges. It's a very grim episode, to be honest, because ultimately when you look at it, you have to bear in mind that what you're looking at, although it's done in a Buffy way and she faces a giant snake, what you're looking at is an extended metaphor for date rape. And you have to bear that in mind when you're watching it. Then you have to think about, okay, how does that then make this a feminist piece? You're looking at gender roles and representation, with Angel being the person in the relationship presented as jealous and as holding back, and Buffy being the forward, kind of more outspoken person in the relationship. Now, again, you're looking at this with a view of gender norms and in the 90s, where women were depicted more as the jealous type. Women were depicted as the ones more likely to hold back, more likely to be disinterested in a physical relationship, whereas men were more forward, more pushy, and certainly not jealous. And obviously, you're looking at female empowerment. I've stopped putting that in any of them after this slide because you're looking at female empowerment in every single episode. So, now guys, if you are watching this, if you're like, right, I'm going to sit down and watch an episode, what I would recommend is every time you sit down to watch an episode, you just either bring up this PowerPoint or bring up this loom, you click it to whenever you see the relevant episode appear, and then you have a quick listen to what you're looking out for, just for your own planning. Season 2, episode 11 is Ted. Here you're looking at domestic abuse and child abuse, predominantly kind of child abuse. This specifically focuses on the manipulation of a vulnerable family and a vulnerable teenager. It also highlights the difficulties of being a single mother, which is something that, again, we'll talk about in class for other episodes too. And it highlights very real difficulties of being a child of divorce, specifically in terms of one of your parents forming a new relationship, someone else moving into your home or your house, someone else starting to take the role of a parent that you perhaps do not respect or know in any way. It's obviously, again, done in a very Buffy way, but you're looking at these as metaphors. You're looking at these as what they say about the situations that Buffy finds herself in, as we could apply them to the real world, not Buffy's monster world. Season 2, episode 14, Innocence. This is a particularly grim episode in terms of just treatment of women, treatment of a young treatment of a young girl. It deals with issues now, depending on what state you're in, depends on whether or not it does deal with underage sex. But arguably, it deals with issues such as underage sex, relationships with an older partner. I'm not really spoiling anything past about season 3 or 4 to reveal that Angel's character is a vampire and he is hundreds of years old. It's got a whole Twilight vibe going on here, but it's not Twilight. It's much better, and it came first. You're dealing with maturity and responsibility and being potentially manipulated, which is in inverted commas, for sex. Now, I said beforehand you should watch episode 13 before you watch episode 14. That informs what has happened to Angel and why he is the way he is. But again, we're not looking at this as a show that has magic and vampires and things. We're looking at this as a metaphor for how young women can be manipulated into sexual relationships, and then how they can be easily discarded by older partners. It's not a very happy episode, but it is one that is very worth watching for the message that it contains. We also have to think about, is this... could we argue that this undermines its feminist message? I would say no, but the argument has been made that yes, it does undermine its feminist message, and we'll talk about that as well. It's interesting, it's powerful, it's well worth a watch. Season 4, episode 19, New Moon Rising. This episode almost didn't make the cut, you can tell, because it doesn't have a GIF. No GIF for this one. But in the fact that it deals with werewolves as well as reactions to an LGBT relationship, snuck it in under the wire. Now, before this, Willow and Tara have been getting close. This is the start of what we might understand as their admittance of their LGBT relationship. It's the start of Willow starting to openly admit how she feels for Tara, and it's also got an interesting reaction from Oz. The werewolves, I'm going to just take a wee moment here. Werewolves are interesting in the media. Werewolves represent the monster within, something within us all that we cannot control, and that under the right set of circumstances can burst out of us and terrorize and cause untold damage. Okay, they represent uncontrolled anger. Werewolf movies tend to become popular around wartime. It's really interesting. You can track horror movies at different times throughout society. Different horror movies peak in popularity at different times. Werewolf movies tend to become most popular during wartime. And the argument is that werewolves allow us to understand the monster within men. Men, when I say men, I mean man, I mean humanity. It allows us to understand the monsters within humanity, I should have said, actually. The parts of us that can do things we would have never assumed we could before, whether it is, Nazi Germany just following orders, or Vietnam just following orders. But the idea that there are parts of us that are monsters and that those parts can actually be released and unleashed upon the world. Werewolves are an interesting metaphor in any piece of literature or media. And here is no exception. And I want you to think about that when we meet Oz and we see his interactions. Previously, Oz was a fan favourite character. He was Willow's partner in Paramore, and he was importantly an all-round nice guy. Very easygoing, very likeable. Every now and then he turned into a werewolf. It wasn't necessarily a big deal. Well, it was. He went around trying to kill and eat people, but he rarely managed, so that's fine. This episode, you should watch how the LGBT relationship is treated by an ex-partner. So at this point, Willow and Tara are getting closer, and Ozzy's reaction is crucial. Again, think about the werewolf and what that tells us about potentially nice guys, the kind of thing that might be kind of lurking under the surface. And also think about that the male reaction to losing a partner that Oz had assumed would just wait around for him. At this stage, after becoming a werewolf, Oz has gone away for the best part of a year, leaving Willow alone, entirely alone without him. And she's obviously moved on. And then he turns up. So it's a good episode. It's well worth watching. Think about it in terms of monsters within men the sides of us that we cannot control that when unleashed can do damage. Season 5, Episode 6, The Family, is again a grim episode with a very satisfying ending. The episode focuses on patriarchal relationships within a family and how they impact that family. So the idea that the men within a family control that family, they are in charge, and wives and daughters are subservient, or certainly lesser. It again is coming from a more southern state American kind of viewpoint where this might be believed. And I'm speaking very generically, as we do with media. I'm not saying that every family in the southern states would act like these people, but I'm saying it is a viewpoint that would be more common in the southern states. And again, it's looking at how these people deal with women, strong women, and LGBTQ plus relationships. It's about acceptance, it's about manipulation. It's a good episode. It's well worth watching, because one of the more interesting things is, and I think I'm right in saying it, is that character that you can just see her shoulder there in pink, is female reactions to mistreatment and being subservient, being made to be subservient, because some of them, you'll see two different responses. As far as an episode on classic Wave 2 feminism and intersectional feminism, this episode has it all. And as I said, quite a satisfying conclusion to it. Then we have Season 5, Episode 16, which is The Body. The episode doesn't deal with feminism necessarily. What it does is it serves to humanize Buffy. It reminds us that Buffy is a teenage girl facing real world problems. Yes, she carries the weight of the world on her shoulders, but there are other things, not everyday things, but real human issues that she encounters as well. I put it in mandatory watching with a caveat, as you'll see at the bottom, and I'll go over in a minute, because the opening to this episode is the most powerful opening of any TV show I've ever seen. The use of language, the use of different techniques is absolutely brilliant. Maybe worth watching episode 15 beforehand, just to inform yourself a bit more about what's going on. I would actually probably recommend watching from about episode 12 if you have the time, but episode 16 is a really, really brutal but brilliant episode. Now, my caveat for it is this episode deals with the death of a family member in an emotional way and a difficult way. It does not shy away from that event. If this is likely to cause you any issues, upset, or anything like that, I strongly recommend that you read it or read up on it instead of watching it. It is grim, but very, very well done. And then complete contrast, which is nice. So you can go from that episode to a very different episode. We have Once More with Feeling. It's a brilliant episode, a variety of interesting media techniques, all caused because the episode is filmed as a musical. All right, the whole episode pretty much is a musical. It deals very closely with depiction of an LGBT relationship on the screen. So beforehand, as I'm hoping you'll note, Willow and Tara's relationship is very inferred. Here it is more, it's displayed on the screen, but still in a way that isn't as obvious as previous heterosexual relationships. So I want you looking and thinking about audience, society, and institutions. What issues would they have faced in depicting this as openly as previous heterosexual relationships? It's a fabulous episode, absolutely fantastic. I love it. It's well worth the watch with some incredibly catchy numbers. This is one of my favourite episodes of Buffy the Vampire Slayer of all time, because it is just brilliant. And the villain in it is awesome. Season 6, Episode 13, Dead Things. This episode informs the next 3 that you will have to watch. Not the next 3 episodes in the season, but the next 3 that you'll have to watch. If you're watching this show through, you'll have already met Warren. If you aren't, this will be your first time meeting Warren. He's the worst. He epitomizes the type of man that would stand against feminism in any time, in any form. He is full of what has been dubbed, in a kind of casual way, white male rage, the anger felt by white men who feel they are being denied their birthright as a white man in favour of women or ethnic minorities who they see as lesser. So to expound on that just a little bit, white male rage comes attached to toxic masculinity and white privilege. White men often feel that they are entitled to women, jobs, money, and status because they are white men. Because previously, frankly, their fathers were entitled to all those things by virtue of being a white man. Okay, their ancestors could take slaves and then they could molest and rape their slaves if they felt like they could take what they wanted. It was a time where being a white man meant you were the most powerful person going. I'm not saying that's not the case now. White privilege and male privilege are still very, very much things today, but they are lesser. Not gone, but lesser. What that means is there are groups of men, this is specifically in the US, but it is something that you will see everywhere. Groups of white men who are angered by the idea of women in the workplace, or ethnic minorities, or people marrying or having relationships with people of other races, because they see this as impinging on their ability to exercise their power as a white man. There's an awful lot to it. There's actually a huge amount to it. It is incredibly grim, incredibly depressing, and incredibly damaging. And it's something that we will be looking at more in depth, especially if I can work out a way to teach Joker to the class. We will look at it in terms of the incel movements in America. Incel stands for involuntarily celibate. What it means, it's a movement of men in America who, to put it completely bluntly, move to what is considered terrorist actions because they are unable to instigate sexual relationships with women. And their terrorist actions almost always are focused against women. What they say, they argue that women, because women don't want to be with them, because women would rather be with more attractive or more intelligent or more accomplished men, or rather be with each other, i.e. lesbian relationships, they have decided that they will kill, maim and rape women. They will take what they want because they won't be given it. It's absolutely awful, and if we can study Joker, we will connect studying Joker to this. But if you want to find out more, if you look up incel and you read up about it, then you'll find out a wee bit more. I'm taking longer than I intended. Season 6, episodes 18, 19, and 20 is the satisfying conclusion to this white male rage, toxic masculinity, and a less satisfying conclusion to one element of the LGBTQ plus representation in Buffy. When you're watching this, I want you to think about how these episodes potentially undermined everything that had been done for the LGBTQ plus people or in Buffy previously. I also want you to watch it with an eye for white male rage, and I want to ask yourself, is this a criticism of LGBTQ plus relationships, or is it highlighting the dangers of these relationships in a heteronormative world? Heteronormative means a world that wants to push heterosexual relationships and wants to kind of diminish, ban, or do away with anything that isn't a heterosexual relationship. I'm of course open to discussion here. I have my views, but that's not to say they're right. My recommendation, these are the episodes that you have to watch by the time we return to school. If you haven't, I'll be annoyed. There will obviously be a wee bit of wiggle room, but if you go home on your first day after school and go, Mr. Corbett says, I'm behind and I need to watch 13 episodes of Buffy, and I get angry phone calls from parents or guardians, I will be annoyed, okay? You should watch these before you return to school. We won't be watching them in class. The reality is, I do not know how much time we will each have in the classroom. I do not know how many lessons we will have to deliver online. And so I need you to have watched season 1 of Killing Eve and all of these episodes of Buffy prior to our return to school. We'll be studying elements of them. I will be showing you clips, but mainly we'll be looking at the societal and social issues surrounding them and then looking at the 7 key aspects. I would recommend taking short notes on each episode. But to emphasize again, I will be recommending that you watch each episode again before we study it. That means you will have watched it twice. I would actually recommend you watch it several times because that will give you the best understanding. But I do want you to watch them twice before you write anything on them in class. Because that way you'll have a really good, keen understanding of what you're talking about. This is really important. Higher media is a difficult subject. I keep saying it and I'm going to keep saying it. It is a tough subject. It is equated more to the difficulty level of advanced higher English and is often given as a substitute to pupils who either are unlikely to pass advanced higher English and want a subject with a similar kind of workload and capacity, or pupils where their school does not offer advanced higher English and so they offer higher media instead. It's a tough subject. You will be expected to research areas that you find interesting in your own time without me telling you to, and applying your learning to the text that we are looking at. There are podcasts and articles about Buffy, which you can read, which you can listen to. They're brilliant. They're really, really interesting. You could also read up on feminism in the 90s, viewer responses to Buffy, the complaints that they received, the representation that they achieved, and where, especially if you're not a member of some of the minority groups that are being represented, i.e. Ethnic minorities or LGBTQ+. If you then read about how people who are members of those groups feel the representation went, where it was successful and where it fell down, you'll be more informed. And that's really important. There is no small amount of information out there, and it is up to you to go out there and research it yourself. I will be giving you articles that I want you to read, but ultimately my expectation is if you hit on an episode and you're like, oh man, that was really interesting, or oh man, I can't believe that's connected to this. My expectation is that you'll look that episode up, find out what other people have said about it, maybe look up that issue and how it was in the 90s, how it is now, how it's changed, how Buffy influenced that change. Anything. There's tons that you can do. Higher media is all about informing yourself as you go along, especially in this current kind of coronavirus climate. We will still be having a call on Tuesday. I know I haven't given you anything to do this week for Tuesday specifically, apart from watch this, but we will still have our call. I anticipate it being brief, but I want to go over the opening of Season 1, Episode 1 of Buffy the Vampire Slayer. I also want to have a quick chat to you about the course, my expectations and the difficulties you may encounter. And finally, if you have any problems whatsoever in viewing Buffy on More 4 or Killing Eve on iPlayer, you can let me know then, or you can email me. The call on Tuesday, I'm hoping, won't be much more than half an hour. It'll give you a wee opportunity to fire some questions at me and things like that. Above and beyond that, your essay is still due in for Tuesday. I understand some of you have been having a few issues with it. If that is the case, then you can let me know, and I will probably offer you an extension. I will be annoyed if you don't let me know until Tuesday, and then you'll, oh, by the way, can I have that extension? If you need it, let me know in advance. It's polite, frankly. I don't think I've got anything else I need from you today. I hope you're enjoying this lovely weather that we are having, and we can go to parks now. Yay! I think. Don't quote me on that. Sorry, but yeah, above and beyond that, I hope you're keeping well, and I look forward to chatting to you guys on Tuesday. Can we have a bit more of a turnout on Tuesday? Actually, let's take away the thumbs up. annoyed Mr. Corbett. There's plenty of people who are making it every week, which is fantastic. Some people who haven't made it for a specific reason and they've let me know, and that's fine. But there are people signed up to this course who I have not talked to on any Loom call yet. I'm going to set up the Loom either today or tomorrow. I am going to post this on Show My Homework today, which is Thursday. I expect to see you guys there on Tuesday for that Loom call. If you're not there, and if you're someone who hasn't been on any of the previous Loom calls, I don't recommend. I think you're on the wrong course. Unless you're someone who, again, I know there have been people who have had issues with attending the calls, and that's fine. If you're someone who I have been told about already, or has let me know already, that's all right. But if you're someone who has given no reason for not attending and has just not been attending, you are on the wrong course. This is a course for people who want to be here, people who are meeting deadlines, people who are engaging with what we are doing. If you do not fall into any of those boxes, frankly, I would recommend you pick another course, because what will happen is if you do not start to engage now, you will fall behind and you will not pass. Higher media is incredibly tough. A number of the people I am referring to here are people who are crashing higher media as well, which I wouldn't recommend for someone. I would still be dubious if someone had made each call and was crashing it. I would still be worried for them. But if you're one of the people who's crashing higher media, who has not attended any of the calls, and you still do not attend the call on Tuesday, then I would seriously reconsider your subject choice, because this isn't an easy subject. I'm not going to do the learning for you. I can't do the learning for you. I will provide you with notes. I've actually been into the school, and I'm going to put together a pack of notes which I'll send out to everyone, which will cover some of the key elements of the National 5 course, where you can update yourself. But if you're not even attending the calls, the odds of you managing that home learning yourself, well, the odds are slim. Now, thank you very much for listening to this call. I hope you're keeping well, and I very much look forward to having as many of you on the call at 10 a.m. on Tuesday, this coming Tuesday. All the best and keep well.